this is CELO. My new EP featuring 2 tracks, Give You Love and Patterns, is out now on Midnight Sun Recordings. Now I've been asked by a few people if I could do a tutorial where I focus on how I arrange my tracks. So for this special video I'm actually going through how I've arranged the track Patterns. Let's check it out. So here's the project file for my track Patterns. I will play the track through to the second breakdown just so you can get a good idea of how it sounds and also some of the arrangement. And then what I'll do is I'll go through how I've laid out the arrangement of this track afterwards. Here we go. So now we're trying to explain how I've got this track arranged a little bit. What I've done here is I've actually put some markers in the track so you can easily see where the first breakdown is and then where the first drop is, a sort of halfway point in the drop, the second breakdown, drop number 2, and then the outro. And if I quickly look at the intro first of all, so this whole section here, my main intro is sort of 32 bars long. And then after that, I have this like breakdown section for 16 bars. And I'm using this to sort of make a little bit of a lull in the track and start building up some tension towards the drop. And then the drop section is a total of 64 bars long. And I've kind of split it up into 2 halves a little bit where you can see that there's like this sort of like a bit of a hole in the drums here where I'm trying to give the sort of dance floor a bit of a break. And then after that, I've got the second breakdown, and this one's a bit longer. So I've got this breakdown here, which is just filled with melodic elements mainly. And then the next part of the breakdown is then where I've actually bringing in the bass, killing off all the melodic and pad elements, And it's actually here that I've sort of switched up the bass a little bit just to give it a slightly different melody compared to the first drop. And then I've got the drop 2 section here, and then after that I then have an outro section. And the tune in total is 224 bars long, and it goes for 2 minutes and 12 seconds in total. So if I just try and sort of start having a look at how I've got this split up over here as well. As I normally always do, I've got the drums, the bass, the effects, the melodies, and the pads put together in their separate groups or buses. I've also got this little group down here called bass creation. Even though it's turned on here, all the channels are turned off, and that's where I've actually used to create the main bass, which I'll show at the end of the video. And then lastly, I've got a reference track placed in here at the end that I can use to reference loudness and and placement of elements and so on. So if I start with the intro, I've got these 32 bars here, and if I just have a look at the drums, what I've got is I have most of the drum elements playing throughout the whole intro. The only things I don't have playing in the first 16 bars, I believe, is the kick. And what I've actually done here is if I go to the very, very start of the track and have a look down here on the bus, I've got this auto filter. And what I've actually done is I'm automating the filter so that it's opening up as the track plays along. So if I just jump ahead a few sort of bars, you can slowly see that as the intro plays along, the filter is opening up. And then it's at this point here where the filter fully opens up and you can hear all the drums. So I'll just play a little portion of these just so you can hear how it sounds from, let's play it from this 9 bar part here. Yeah, so the first 16, they're just starting to give a bit of an intro to how the drums will sound, but not sort of like unleashing the full force until it hits at this point here. Also through this intro first sort of like 16 bars, I've got a little bit of bass playing. This isn't the main bass, but it's a sort of like a, it's just like an extra little melodic sub bass that I've added into the intro part. I'll just play that so you can hear what that sounds like. Now it's quite quiet, but maybe as you could see, what I've actually been doing is similar idea to the drums. I have this auto filter on this channel here. So I'm just sort of slowly opening up a little bit so that this sort of sub melody is slowly fading in as the track's building up. And if I then go down to the pads so we can have a little look and see what's happening in that first 16. I believe, first of all, I've got this reflections pad, and I think that this was actually one of the ones that this was kind of where the idea for the track came from. So I'll just play this through so you can hear what it sounds like. Yeah, it's actually a classic pad taken from one of these classic sample packs. I can't remember which one it's called now. But this was what really kind of got the idea going. Something that sort of sounded euphoric and sort of like big and atmospheric. And then what I then done is I found another pad sample layered up with it. And I'll just play this second pad on it so just so you can hear what it sounds like. Because it's quite quiet, but it just adds a few extra little layers. Yeah, so this pad sits just a bit sort of like higher while this one sits a bit lower and is sort of fills more of the space. And then once I get to the 16 bar section, that's when I start having more of the drums coming in, and there's a few more bass elements coming in as well, and I've also got a lot of the melodic elements and even more pads coming in. And I'll just have a quick look and show you what some of the drums are like here at this point in more detail. So here I've got the kick coming in. Just quickly zoom in so you can see that here. I've also got the snare, and as I normally do, I have sort of 3 layers for the snare. And then I've got a variety of drum elements. I've got a shuffle, and I've got some breaks here. So there's like a main break, and then this one's called aim and top. So I'm assuming this sits kind of at the top of the frequency range. And then further down, I've got some little drum fill elements. And if I then take a quick look at the bass, I've got this little melodic element here that I was talking about that I used in the beginning. And if I go a little bit further down, I've also got this bass sort of like tops layer. I think I'll just play that through just so you can see what that sounds like. So I'm thinking that will be resampled bass from my main bass, which I'll show you in a bit. And that's just something that sits at the very top of the frequency spectrum with a frequency shifter on it just to give it a little bit of movement. And then down here I've also got another layer that's sort of starting to come in, and this is just something to give the bass a little bit more interest and sort of sits out at the sides. So those 3 bass elements then run through this 17 to 32 bar section just before the actual breakdown. And it's then at this 16 bar point that I then have a lot of melodic elements coming in. And I'll just play these on their own just so you can hear what they sound like. Now there's something I've got here in this track that I actually don't do very often, but I have all the melodic elements actually as MIDI. I normally always work in audio, and even if I start in MIDI, I'll always bounce it down to audio, but I can see I haven't done that here. So this first element I've got here is actually made from a serum patch. I'll just open up serum so you can see what it is, and there's a good chance it's probably just a preset, but maybe I've slightly tweaked a little bit. And then if I just play it through, so it's literally just a few little notes playing every now and again. And there's some various things like some delay and some hyperdimension and so on to give it some space in the spectrum. I've then got this little melodic element here, and I'll just play this through, and this is also another serum patch. And this is just a little, another little melodic element that's just repeating. And if I just open up Serum, and it looks like it's literally this PL Pook preset, which is simply just saw waves set to like a sort of pluck. And I'll just play it so you can see what's going on with the filter and so on here. So it's simply just a plucky element. And then the last element is this ARP, and I'm actually playing some chords, it looks like here in this, and it looks like I'm playing some, there's an F minor chord there, for example. Now the whole point of something like this, like an arc, for me is it almost feels a bit like a pad. It's something that's just supposed to kind of really fill the space and kind of sit at the background. But without it, the track would sound quite empty. And I can see what I've got here is I've got these chords playing here, and then I'm using the arpeggiator in Ableton with this back 16th setting. And again, I'm using Serum, and I'll just open up Serum so you can see the patch. And this looks like it's one I've actually just made myself, and it's literally just a saw wave made into like a pluck. And it looks like I'm using LFO1 here to just control the filter. So the filter is just quickly opening up and closing again. If I now jump onto the pads, I've got these same two elements that were playing in the first 16, but then I've also got some extra elements here now, just adding more kind of space and melodic element to the track. If I just play this one through so you can hear what this one sounds like. So just a kind of like a really spaced out little stab, and I've got an auto pan on here. This is just sending it left and right, and then it looks like I'm using FabFilter Timeless just to give it a lot of delay and space, and then also the wider plugin just to spread it out. And then in the pad section, I'm not quite sure why this is here, but I've actually got a what looks a bit like a kind of melodic element, and again it's something coming from Serum. And it's almost like a little kind of arpeggiated style melody. I'll just play it through so you can hear what it sounds like. Now if I just open up the patch so you can see the Serum patch. So this looks like it's actually come from a preset. This is the Crushed Pluck preset. And it looks like down here I've got a mod build set up for the dry wet. This has probably just come from the preset, I imagine. But it looks like this is controlling two parameters, and if I go into the effects, it looks like it's controlling the delay and the reverb. So it's just giving it more space. I'm slowly opening up this every sort of, what's that now? 4 bars or so, just to give an extra little bit of space. So the only other thing I haven't really mentioned much about yet is effects, and it doesn't look like I have very many at all in here, but if I just sort of play them at this point here, so this is just before the 16 bar drop, I'll just, you can hear what they sound like. So I've got this spacious choir free. So this looks like it's something I must have done in a synth, and I've frozen it and then sort of bounced it down to audio. So I can't remember exactly where this comes from. But this is just a little riser. I'll just play it on its own. And then I've also got this element down here, which is a marked sidechain riser. So I'm assuming this was some sort of a, this could have even been a copy of this pitched up, and then I've stuck like a sidechain on it to give it like a wobble kind of effect. So that was the first 32 bars of the track, and then I come into the breakdown. Now here I actually have most of the melodic elements playing and the pads. And I've also got the effects here. And what I can see I've done in the effects is I've got an additional riser, which is quite a bit longer. I'll just play this through so you can hear what it sounds like. Now this again looks like it's been bounced down from something like Serum or similar, I'm thinking. And then I've used some ping pong delay and some reverb to give it the space. Now another big thing that's happening in the breakdown is this is now where I'm starting to introduce my bass. So I'll just play this through so you can hear what this sounds like. So what it looks like here is I've actually got the sub rolling through most of the this breakdown here, and then every now and again I'm bringing in this like mid layer, which is the Reese, and I'll show you how I created this later. And then I've also just then sort of brought in this bass tops element again here and just continuously played that through. And then I also have this other layer coming in, which playing at the same time as the mids layer. And this is labeled bass sides. And I'm thinking what this is it's just a copy of the actual mid layer that I've got up here. But I've just basically pushed it out to the sides of the mix Actually, you can see it down here. I've pushed it out left and right. So I just use the Hass effects type processing to push it to the sides. And then I'm keeping it up in the sort of topper end of the frequency spectrum. Now I'll play the whole drop section again just so you can hear exactly what it sounds like. But basically what I've got going on is I've killed all the drums, and just before the drop I've got some rolling kicks here. So this is just rolling and building up in tension. And then I have the effects here, and they're building up towards the drop. And then I just basically have the melodic elements and pads playing throughout. But what I'm actually doing is where I have this mid layer of the bass playing, I've actually cut most of the melodies and the pad out just to really give emphasis on the bass. So I'll just play that through and I'll just let it drop here. So to summarize, as you can kind of see by looking at the arrangement here, I'm basically adding more and more elements as the track is building up to this point here where it comes into the breakdown. So start off with the drums just being filtered in, not many melodic or sort of pad elements going on. When I get to this point here where the drums come in, I then have all the melodic elements and pads coming in, and it's just slowly building up towards this point here where the drums drop out of the way. And it's at this point that I really introduce the bass. And that's starting to sort of like set the tone and anticipation for the track. And then here at this point in the breakdown, I then have the drums building up and building up. And I could also hear that on the bass group here, I seem to be sort of filtering the bass out a little bit just before the drop. Now, one other thing that I've done, I do this in almost all of my tracks now, is that throughout the whole intro section, so right up to 49, on my master track, I've actually got a utility device. And what I've done is I've actually just turned the volume down by 1 dB. And then once the track hits the drop, it then goes back to 0. And the point of that is just to give a little bit of extra impact at the drop. So the next important part of the track, of course, is the drop. And I've got that running over 64 bars. I pretty much always actually use 64 bars for my drops because I feel like that gives you sort of like 4 main blocks, so 4 16-bar blocks, and that's enough time to give some variations to the track but not make it so long that it gets boring, because you want to get to a breakdown which then afterwards you can then sort of like do something to switch up the track. So here I've got, of course, all the drums playing, and most of this is exactly the same as it is throughout the breakdown. And as I'm focusing mostly on arrangement here, I'm not necessarily going to show too much about the drums. But I think you can maybe get the idea that by looking at this arrangement here, these two sections of the drums are pretty much the same. What I have here is after the first 8 bars, I have an extra little drum layer coming in just here. And then here I have like a lull in the drums, where I'm putting a little bit of focus on the kind of like bass, and then the same drums repeat from this first 16-bar section here, and then again I've then copied over this drum section here, and then I'm just copying this piece from here over to this section here, and then to my sort of like drop halfway point, I've got this big area here where I've got hardly any drums, and this is just to give a break in the track, and I feel this is something that's actually really quite important to do. Especially in this kind of like track where I'm trying to actually put some emphasis on the sort of drops and what's happening around these areas here and sort of here and also here. And then what I've got here is I've actually started to add in some extra drum elements, as you can see, and then there's even more comes in here for this last section. I'll just play a little piece of each sort of like portion of the drum through so you can hear what's going on. So you can hear that I've got various drum elements coming in, and then just here at this sort of like little mini kind of like sort of breakdown or drop point, if you like, I have a little drum element, and it sounds a bit like what I've done as I stuck a flanger on it, which really spreads it out to the sides and makes it feel like an event's happening just at this point here. And then, as I said, this section here repeats, but if I then play it from here, so you can just hear what's happening before this drop halfway point is happening. So at this drop halfway point here, I've then got, basically I've just cut all the drums out sort of here, apart from like a reverse cymbal. And then at the drop point, I'm trying to put some more sort of emphasis on what's going on with the bass a little bit. And I'm using a couple of drum fills just here. And that leads up to like a single kick drum. And then after that, I have the bass all come in on the snare instead of on the actual the kick drum. I know I've played the track through before already, but I'll just quickly play this little piece here just so you can hear what's going on from this point. So it's that bang here. I'm trying to get like a bit of an emphasis and want to like shot the dance floor a little bit. And then I jump forward to this point here, so I've also got this like other little kind of like lull in the drums here where I've cut most of them out. I'll just play the drums through again so you can hear what's going on at this point, just before this last 16 bar section. It's very similar to before. Basically, I've cut all the drums out and then I've got a reverse cymbal coming up to this point. And that's where here, I have all of the elements of my track coming back in again. If I now just quickly have a look at the bass, I'll just play the bass group through just so you can hear what's going on. Effectively, I've got two sort of like Reese type mid layers going on that alternate from one to the other. Here it is. So I'll just pause it there just a minute just to explain a little bit what's going on. I've got my basic sort of like, I call them basic, but the basic bass layers playing through this first 16 bar section here. And then what I've got here is I've got this like little lull in the sound where I've got this like bass drop, I think, where I've just taken the bass, resampled it, and then I've basically sort of like started it high and pitched it down so it has like a drop sound. And then I've started to add in another layer. And all it is it's basically just a flanged copy of the bass. And what I quite often do is I will, if I have like a nice mid layer or a bass layer that I like, and I want to add something extra to it, but I don't want to affect the original track I've got it on, I'll just send it to another track, and on that track I'll add some kind of flanger or just whatever other effect I want to add. And that helps to sort of like build up the track a little bit in stages so it doesn't sound exactly the same from this section to this section. If I then play this section here, and I'll explain what's going on afterwards. Yeah, so here, I'm repeating the bass again, but now I've got like an extra little bass sort of like stab sound that I'm bringing in every now and again. And I'm just doing some other little things with the bass where I think with flanger or frequency shifters, I'm just moving the bass around a little bit more just to give it some extra interest. And I've also got like an extra little layer here, and actually I think this is part of the bass layer which I had right at the intro coming in. Once I get to this point then, you'll notice that most of the mid of the bass has actually been dropped out. And the reason I've done that is I've actually removed most of the mid so that I've actually got room in the mix for my melodies and pads, which are all coming in here at this point. I'll just open up the bass group now so you can see some of the layers of what I've got going on here. So I've got a sub bus, and this is what my main sub bass is being sent into, and I basically just got it sent into here so I can use the sidechain compressor. This other one here called sub is the one that I had at the intro, which was just a very sort of like simple melodic stabby sub that I had going on. I've then got a mid bus, and this is where I'll be sending all of my mid basses into. And it looks like here, as I've maybe shown in other tutorials and explained other places, possibly on Instagram actually, I'm using this mid-side sidechain technique. So what I'm actually doing is I'm actually only sidechaining the mid of the sounds with the kick and the snare, because the kick and the snare sit mostly in the middle, so I don't necessarily need to touch the sides. And then I can also see that to give some extra movement on the mid bus, it seems like at this point here, I'm using this EQ8 and I'm using an LFO, and I'm actually moving the frequency around here a little bit just to give some extra interest. And then down here I've got this layer called mids 3. So it looks like I've got a first layer called mid 2 playing through the first 32 bars, and then I've switched it up a little bit and used a different layer, which will be the same bass, but I've probably just used some slightly different processing. And then down here I've got some other layers of bass, and these will all be resampled pieces of these original basses, and I just affect them in different ways with different processing, just again to add extra layers. Then I have a bass tops layer, so this is just something that will sit at the very, very top of the frequency spectrum, just to give that kind of fuzz at the top. And then every now and again I seem to be having this bass sides layer, and this seems to be playing over the top of every other bass, or probably if I go up here, it looks like it's playing over my mids 2 layer and mids 3 layer. And this just gives some extra width to the bass. And then on this layer here, number 39 audio as it's called it, this looks like it's resampled bass, and I believe this is the one where I have these bass drops going on. So if I just go into the I've obviously rendered this down already, but I would have actually done like a pitch drop on the resample piece of the bass from up here, and then I'm using the auto filter, and if I just play this one on its own, you can see what's going on with the auto filter. Yeah, so as I'm pitch dropping, I'm actually just sort of slowly opening up the filter as well. And then later on, so this is now for the second half of the drop, I've got this extra little like bass stab coming in. I'll just play that so you can know what it sounds like. And that just gives like a little shock every now and again, and it's worked especially well at this point here, where I had that lull in the sort of drums and the bass at the halfway point. If I just play that again with all the elements turned on so you can hear what's going on there, you can hear what happens when this little drop comes in here. It just almost gives like a bang to the track, or a boom, and that sort of helps to shock the track and maybe shock the dance floor. And then a little later, I've then got this sort of like, this element here coming in the bass that I had from the intro. I'll just zoom out so you can see it. And I showed that earlier here. That's just come back in. And then I've just got another layer here, which I've called bass alternative top. So that's just be another bass top layer, which I'm assuming is going to be some kind of like fuzz. Yeah, so that's just resample bass, cut most of the bottom end out, and then I've used frequency shifter and the wider plugin just to spread it out. And the frequency shifter just gives it the sort of movement. So as you can notice in the drop, I haven't really got much melodic or pad-wise going on. I've got like a little melodic stab coming in at the start of every 8 bars. And then I can see here at this 16 bar point, I've got a little pad, and I reckon I'm probably using that as a mini riser. So yeah, I've just taken a portion of a pad, and then I'm just using it as a mini riser here, and then also here. And it's then at this point where I start to slowly bring in more elements of the melodies and the pads. So as the track is building up, I'm just adding more and more elements again. But I've just always got to be conscious of making space for all these elements. And that is why that when I got to this point here in the bass, I actually basically cut out a lot of the mids, because I need to make space in the mix for the melodies and the pads. If you have the full bass spectrum playing at the same time as the melodies and the pads, it will just sound really messy. Yeah, and at this point where I've got the bass cutting out, if I just open up, I can show you what I'm actually doing. I believe I'm using an auto filter probably on the mids layers. So yeah, so if I look at this mid 1 layer here, if I just go to this point here, I can see that the bass is opened up a lot more on the filter. But I go here where the pads and the melodic elements come in, I've actually cut all this area right here. And it looks like I've probably done something very similar when I go to this one here as well. Yes, and this lane here is actually that auto filter on this one here, so I'm also just cutting out a lot of this sort of mid-range area so I can make room for the melodic elements and pads. So then move on to the breakdown. So what I've done here is I've pretty much removed all of the drums, and then I just have this very simple sort of melodic bass sort of stab going on. But I've left the melodies and the pads playing through. So this just gives the dance floor a breather here. And then it's at this point, halfway through the second breakdown, that I bring in the bass again, and I've killed all of these melodic and pad elements. And I'm slowly sort of building up to a second drop here. So I've now got some drums slowly coming in here. And I can see that I've used a similar filtering technique here as I did in the intro. So if I just change this 2 seconds so you can see it. So here I can just see that the drums slowly start to filter in as I get towards the drop. But what I've also done with the bass here is I've actually changed the pattern of the bass a little bit, just to give it some, just to make the sound, or make the track sound a bit more interesting for the second half of it. If I just play the track from here so you can hear what's going on with the bass and what goes on at this second drop. So I'll just go into the bass group and I'll show you what I've done. And it's something very simple, but it just makes it sound a little bit different for the second drop. I'll focus on this mids layer here because this is where the change is. If I just play this bit here, you can hear what the bass sound like in the first drop section again. So it was first a lower note, then a higher note. But what I've done is I just put the higher note first and then the lower note afterwards. And that's enough just to make the track sound a little bit different for the drop section. And it's that I've basically done throughout the first, I think, 16 or 32 bars of the drop 2 section. And so at the second drop, instead of just having the track come in with a bang, like I've done with the first drop, I've actually used the sort of same technique that I'd used from the middle section of the first drop. So it just gives us a little lull in the track, and then the track comes in with a bang again here. And I've actually basically kind of copied that same technique for the next 16 bars. So in theory, apart from really sort of changing up the bass a little bit through this piece here, I'm using the same techniques I'd use in drop 1 over in drop 2. And normally whenever I write my tracks, I'll always first concentrate on getting drop 1 sorted out, because I will quite often actually just copy over the same transition techniques into drop 2. And then to make it sound different, I will do something like change the bass, or maybe even change the drums sometimes. And then again, if you look through this drop section here, I've got the melodic and the pad elements slowly building up to this point. And I believe what I've done here for this piece here, just before the outro, is I've pretty much just copied over this 97 to 112 bar section and just placed it in here. And then I've got this little lull just here at the end, and then that's when I then go into the outro. So the outro is kind of almost a bit of a reverse of the intro, really. So on the intro, I had this, I had the first section where the drums were actually sort of like a bit more simplified, and there was no bass playing. And that's kind of what I've copied over here in a little way, but I don't think I've actually filtered the drums out at all going through the outro. If I just have a quick look through, it started to filter out towards the end there, I can see, building up to the end of the track. And I've also got all of the melodic and pad elements just playing here on this first part. But then as I'm getting towards the end of the track, I'm slowly removing them and just making the track feel like it's starting to die off and ending. I'll just play the outro all the way through so you can hear what it sounds like. So as mentioned earlier in the video, I promised I would quickly show how I made the bass patch for this tune. Now what I've done is I've used Serum. I'm not quite sure what's happened, but the original patch, something seems to have happened to it, and I've kind of lost exactly how I'd made it. But I can briefly show what it did in Serum, and then I can show you the rendered out patch afterwards. So all I'd done in Serum was I basically made up a very simple Reese patch. Now I'm not going to go through how exactly you make a Reese patch, because there's so many tutorials on YouTube for that. But basically it was a couple of saw waves or similar, detuned. And that sounded a little bit like this in the start. And it looks like I've also added an extra bit of drive and so on to the filter just to give it a bit more meat. I've probably added a bit more distortion as well, but then what I've done is I've rendered out this patch here from Serum, and this is what it sounds like. Then what I did was I took this rendered out patch and I've put it into a sampler on a MIDI track. Now what I've done is I've actually made 3 channels on this MIDI track, and I've basically got 3 copies of a sampler, each having the same patch or sample that I'd made from Serum. If I just look at the center first and just play this, I also have the notes for the track, so you can start to get a feel for how this sounds now. So then what I've done with this center channel is I've duplicated it twice, where I've got what I've marked as a left hand and a right hand. I'm not sure why I've marked them left and right hand, because they're not panned at all, but that's just how I've decided to mark it. But the difference between them is that they are exactly the same as the center, but I've just detuned the left hand one by -1 semitone and then detuned the right hand one by +1 semitone. So now if I play all these 3 together, you'll hear that the patch sounds much bigger and fatter. there's just a lot more movement now going on, and that's simply because I've now detuned the left and the right hand to each other, so there's this natural phasing going on. And then from that, all I would have done was rendered it out to a piece of audio, bit like I've got down here, so then I could chop it up and use it in the track as audio. Thanks very much for watching this tutorial. Give You Love and Patterns are out now on Midnight Sun Recordings. Check out the video description below for all the download and streaming links. And if you want to know more about me, remember to head on over to CELO DnB.com. Cheers.